Well, hi everybody. Today is Monday, March the 23rd, and in this video we're going to be continuing the exploration of how to basically manage your physical and mental health when you are stuck in quarantine for coronavirus. In this video we're going to be talking about mindfulness and meditation techniques, especially as using these as strategies to improve our mental health. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Alright, well, as I mentioned on today's video, we're going to be talking about how to use mindfulness and meditation techniques to enable us to basically mitigate some of the physical and mental health challenges that are happening across the world because of people being quarantined for coronavirus. Again, I want to go over the purpose of these videos. We're going to do some general updates on coronavirus. We're going to be talking about tools that will enable you to improve your physical and mental health while you are in isolation. And what we're not doing in these videos is trying to provide individualized medical advice or to replace the advice of the World Health Organization, the CDC, these excellent organizations that are working so hard to bring us good intel at the moment. So where are we at right now? As I said today, it is the 23rd of March. What we can see is that these restrictions on people moving around, leaving their homes, are increasing and are being put into action across the world. We're seeing in the United States that multiple states have now said we want people to stay home unless they really have to go out for something essential like medicine or food. And in general, we're seeing that cases of this coronavirus are continuing to rise in an exponential fashion across the world, with the notable exception, again, of China, which has noted very few new cases in the last several days. We're going to talk again about the essential actions. If you're just tuning in, if this is your first video, the most important thing to take away is what can you do to lower your risk of getting this disease at this stage. And that is going to require social distancing, which is just moving yourself physically apart from other people. It is lowering your exposure to non-human vectors. That means don't touch things that other people have touched. And then finally, it is trying to limit the chances that you inoculate yourself, that you infect yourself with the virus. And the best way to do that is to be very mindful of washing your hands anytime you're touching something that might carry the virus. Okay. So, as we've said in the other videos, there are a lot of things that come up as far as psychological and physical impacts of being in quarantine. In the previous videos, we've been talking about things like social isolation and sleep, and today we're going to be talking about mindfulness and meditation. And why is that? It's because this as a topic relates to our concentration, our ability to make good decisions, emotional exhaustion, our mood, and anxiety. So, topic again, mindfulness and meditation during quarantine. I want to give us some general definitions. These vary a lot, and it's a high probability that if you look somewhere else, they won't agree completely with what I'm saying here. Meditation, I'm describing as a technique that helps us to focus the mind on something specific in order to train our attention, our awareness, to increase calmness, to increase tranquility, versus mindfulness, which is a meditation practice of focusing on current experiences, basically just being more aware of what's going on internally as well as externally. So I'm going to define mindfulness here as a type of meditation. Again, I know there is some variability as far as how people define these terms. Why is it so important to consider these things? Well, let's start with children, and why do we care about, let's say, mindfulness? Well, in this study, which was published in Frontiers in Psychology, they looked at what are the effects of mindfulness plus reflection training on executive functions. What are executive functions? Executive functions are the domain of the prefrontal cortex, the frontmost part of our brain, that enables us to make good decisions, to enable us to weigh the pros and cons of decisions before we make a choice. So in this intervention, they had 218 preschool students, and they either gave them mindfulness and reflection training, literacy training, or business as usual, which basically just meant continuing on what they usually would do. What they found in both the literacy and the mindfulness group is that there were significant improvements over the business as usual group on improving tests of executive function. That's things like maintaining attention. That's things like impulse control. These are things which are absolutely essential in enabling us to make good decisions. Okay, moving on to perhaps what is a bit more relevant to us right now. What they found in this study from South Korea is that when people practice, in this case children practice subtraction meditation, they found that there were decreases in social anxiety, aggression, and stress levels in these elementary school students. So that is a really important thing because what we're seeing is that interventions like meditation can help to lower anxiety, can help to lower negative emotional states and stress, which turns out to be incredibly important right now when so many people are experiencing stress. What else do we get out of this? Well, in this paper, they're talking about emotion regulation, and they're actually reviewing a whole bunch of different trials. So they're looking at different randomized controlled trials here, comparing mindfulness intervention to just general relaxation therapy. And what they found here is that people who did the mindfulness intervention had better self control with emotional regulation and stress reduction. And this was actually related to increased activity in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is the part of the brain that enables us to engage with these higher level decision making abilities. So everything kind of fits together here. And I thought this was a really relevant study as well because what they're looking at here is what happens in meditators versus those who do not meditate. And so they're comparing the activation patterns in the brain in people who meditate versus people who do not meditate. So what they found here is that meditators could maintain attention on task more than people who don't meditate, again, in keeping with the results we just discussed because it activates the prefrontal cortex and enables us to be more focused through our executive functions. But they also found, again, to confirm this, that meditators had increased activation in the medial prefrontal cortex compared to people who did not meditate. Well, that's all wonderful, but how does this all play into what's going on right now? It turns out that something that makes it hard to be mindful and to meditate is stress. Stress in some ways is the opposite of mindfulness because it pulls us into these rumination thought patterns and anxiety thought patterns that really pulls us out of the present and to the past or to the future. What's interesting, though, is that mindfulness and meditation are actually some of the best interventions we have to defeat stress or to significantly lower stress. So you can see we can kind of get sucked into this pattern of believing there's nothing that we can do to be mindful because things are so anxiety provoking and stressful, especially right now with the coronavirus. But in reality, if we can try to at least get started with some of these interventions, that is a wonderful intervention to start lowering the negative impact of stress on our physical and mental health. Okay, so we wanted to try to explain a little bit more as far as how much do you actually need to do meditation or mindfulness in order to get some of these positive benefits, lowering stress or some of the other things that we just described. And what they found in this study, where they basically took 26 people and had them do mindfulness-based attention to breath meditation, where they're just paying attention to their breathing, and had them do this for only 2 weeks, for less than an hour each day, actually. I believe it was 20 to 30 minutes each day. After they completed this 2-week period, they showed them aversive pictures. So something like looking down the barrel of a gun while they were meditating and when they were not meditating. And what they found was so fascinating is that after 2 weeks, this attention to breath down-regulated the activity in this emotional and fear-based hub, the amygdala, and increased the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And that was associated with their subsequent mindfulness ability. So what it's saying is that the increased mindfulness that comes from doing these interventions is actually tethered to observable changes in our brain circuitry. Really important stuff. And that's, again, after only 2 weeks. So really, I think what we need to be asking ourselves is, it's wonderful to read these papers where they're in these controlled conditions, but we have to ask, does mindfulness work in intense circumstances? Because maybe it's helpful to people who have a bit of a stressful job. What about now when we're facing a pandemic and people are experiencing high levels of trauma, either related to the disease itself or the social distancing that comes from the disease? And here I think it's helpful to look at the work of James Gordon. James Gordon was trained at Harvard and he's now at Georgetown. And really what he has done is worked in a wide variety of different settings where there is significant and intense trauma going on. So they've looked at applying mindfulness techniques after wars, in instances where there are climate-related disasters, after school shootings, and in people who are actively serving in the military. As an example of this, one of the papers that he has worked on looked at mind-body skills for post-traumatic stress disorder in Palestinian adults in Gaza. And really what they were doing here is bringing these mind-body skills to see whether it would help with symptoms of PTSD, depression, anxiety, and quality of life in these people who were experiencing basically a war zone. What they found in this study is that there were significant improvements in these metrics that they were looking at. So lower levels of PTSD symptoms, lower depressive symptoms, less anxiety, and significant improvements of quality of life. And this was immediately following participation in this program, which was done over the course of a few weeks. So, what do we know about mindfulness science? I focus here on mindfulness because meditation can be very broad, but mindfulness is something that each of us can really do in a very quick way and in a very time-limited way in our day-to-day lives. So it turns out that mindfulness-based interventions in this first meta-analysis and systematic review is a promising therapeutic option for treating distress symptoms and anxiety disorders. And given that so many people are experiencing anxiety right now around coronavirus, I think we really need to consider the relative merit of applying this statement. Another meta-analysis here looked at how meditation might be helpful in lowering levels of cortisol and lowering levels of sympathetic nervous system activation. And they found that mindfulness, and I should say in this case, meditation, lowered levels of cortisol, systolic blood pressure, and heart rate. So again, these are kind of the outflow products of a hyperactive, stressed, anxious state. And so we see again that meditation lowers these levels of this stress state. So with all this in mind, the question is, how do we apply mindfulness and meditation techniques while we're in quarantine? And, you see pictures like this one of this woman somewhere, I don't know, in Bali having the best day of her life. And you think that's just not realistic for me when I'm in quarantine in my condo or an apartment or a house, maybe in the middle of a city or somewhere that you really can't go outside. But before we discount the relative value of engaging in something like a meditation or mindfulness technique, we've got to understand that as we start to get on each other's nerves and be cooped up in close quarters for long periods of time, there's definitely somewhere in between these two pictures that we can start applying the meditation and mindfulness interventions. So to this end, there are some really easy ways that you can start applying these techniques in order to benefit starting today. One of the easiest ways of doing this is just to do some basic focusing on your breath. Really, all it is just paying attention to your breathing for 2 minutes. You can set a timer. It shouldn't be too crazy, but if it turns out that that's more than you can handle, you can try for 1 minute. I've done this many, many times, and I'm always surprised at how much just that small interval of time is enough to kind of reset my brain. Another popular way of applying these mindfulness and meditative techniques is to do a body scan meditation where you're trying to just focus on going through your entire body. You can start at your head and work your way down to your feet or the other way around. And you're just focusing on how does each part of this body feel at a given time. There's walking meditation. Now, this might not be possible if you don't have access to getting outside right now, but if you have enough room wherever you're living or if you have a backyard, it can be just walking around even in 10, 20 feet and just focusing on what it feels like to walk around, the sensation of the air as you move through it, the sensation of hearing whatever is in your immediate vicinity, how the ground feels on your feet, how your body feels as you're walking. And then you could even do something like mindful eating. We're all trying to keep up ideally with eating some healthy food, even when we're in these challenging situations. But another thing that you can do as you're eating in order to benefit your body is to actually pay attention as you're eating. And that means maybe putting down the phone, putting down the computer and turning off the TV and just focusing on what is the mouthfeel of these foods you're eating. How do they taste? And chewing slowly. So really, there are a whole lot of ways that we can start applying these types of techniques in our day-to-day that don't require us going out to Bali and sitting on some beautiful mountainside. To kind of summarize here, what does it mean when you want to apply these things and you want to maybe get some more resources? Some resources that I've actually found really helpful are apps that you can download for free on your phone. These include Headspace, Insight Timer, and Calm. These are all really great, and I can vouch for them. There are a ton of other ones too. Sam Harris, for example, has a Waking Up app, and Dan Harris has 10% Happier. There are tons and tons of different meditation apps, but these are just a few that I can say are easy, and they have free meditations. There are also a bunch of websites that you can go to that will have lots of information as to how to start meditating if it's something you've never done before, and then will provide a variety of different free meditations. So two that I looked into that you could check out include the UCLA guided meditations website, and then the Free Mindfulness Project, which is freemindfulness.org. Okay, so as I always do, if you would like to connect with me, you can comment on this video, or you can subscribe to this YouTube channel so we can have continued dialogue through these videos. And I have social media on Instagram and a Twitter account if that is interesting to you. Okay, so from that presentation, I hope you understand the core takeaways, which are that we can start using mindfulness and meditative techniques in order to offset some of the mental health challenges that come with being isolated and facing a pandemic right now. That it doesn't really take much. It could be as simple as 2 minutes of paying attention to your breath to get you started, and that there are a whole bunch of easy ways and free ways to continue to explore what might work for you as far as a meditation app or a website, or even if you go to YouTube or to Spotify, there are meditation videos and audio files that are readily available on all of these different sources. So, hope you enjoyed this video. I look forward to doing more of these, and hope you're safe, hope you're well. I'll talk to you soon.